to the show, everybody. Another exciting episode in store. I'm here with the legendary Adam B. Levine, who is a very revered person in not just NFT community, but the cryptocurrency community overall. He's been in the space for quite a long time, was the creator of Let's Talk Bitcoin and then the Let's Talk Bitcoin network. He's a pioneer that has created a ton of early experiments, including LTB Coin, MTM Series, and now has gone off to create many other businesses tokenly. And I'm sure I'm leaving off about 40 other things that he's done. So I'll let Adam talk about that once we get into it. So thanks for joining me, bro. I'm really excited for this.
Yeah, Jake, thanks for having me. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. So, of course, this is a historical NFT pod, but not limited to it. I know you've been on a few shows beforehand, including Adam McBride's show as well, and you pop in and out of the Twitter spaces every once in a while. It wouldn't be right to do anything other than start with the history of who Adam is for those who maybe don't know who you are. Tell us a little bit about your even pre-crypto story. I know you started the podcast originally in 2013. I know there was not many other shows back then. I just had Mad Bitcoins on, who also started something around the same time, and he'd mentioned that it was just you two and maybe one or two other people who were doing something back then. So again, another very early vision.
Yeah. So thanks for all that. So I'm what you call a manifesting generator. What I mean by that is that, I'm the hardest working lazy person you'll ever meet. I use technology as a way to basically take problems that I find in my personal life. I also call myself a proto hipster sometime. I haven't said that on any podcasts, but because I tend to start doing things that hipsters do later on because, hey, it's cool and trendy, whatever. And I just do it because it makes sense to me at the time. And so that means that I wind up doing a lot of stuff way before people understand why even I'm doing it, much less why they would care about it. And that's been kind of true all through my technology history. Right now, I'm actually about a year and a half ago, I got super obsessed with AI artwork. and so I started a company, first incubating it inside Tokenly and then spinning it off earlier this year, called 330 AI, which, depending on when this ends, is probably going to be merging with another company and focusing specifically on game tech. Yeah, it's going to be super interesting. And again, all of it's still up in the air, everything constantly changing. Go to pixelmind.ai, not that site.
All right. I know we got a few of them out here, right? So
I got way too much stuff going on at any given time. But broadly speaking, so my history is, I really value autonomy. I think that autonomy is so important. And I've had experiences throughout my life where I felt like I didn't have the ability to be autonomous and I was really reliant on other people. And they made decisions for me that I didn't like at all. And so I kind of set out to create, a life where I didn't have to really worry about all of that. And tons of sacrifices come with that. I've had very hard times in my life, and I've had, very good times in my life. And the life of an entrepreneur and journalist, in the way that I do it, tends to be a little bit lumpy like that. But it's something that, that I do recommend to the ability that it sort of tickles your fancy. Cryptocurrency to me, is autonomy in a lot of ways. It's the ability to make decisions and to build products, and open source is this too. And disruptive technology is really kind of all about those sorts of things, right? It's taking an answered question. Is something possible? No, it's not possible. And then changing the way that you think about it by nature of technology pushing forward. And then by nature of that, the way that you think about it and the kind of possibilities changing, it means that even though something is possible, right? Like you could do NFTs in the way that we kind of think about them today, long before people cared about the fact that you could do NFTs in the way that we think about them today. And so the availability of something, of a new possibility, is really only important if you can grok it and kind of interpret the world again through it in ways that are meaningful, and that they don't have to be meaningful necessarily to everyone, but they just have to be meaningful to you. And so that's kind of like, that's the very high level hoity-toity way to think about technology. Technology is an empowering thing for us, is it allows us to, it's scary too sometimes. Like the world of AI right now is going through kind of an identity crisis where a lot of artists, who we've been working with are like, wait, is this thing empowering me, or is this, disassociating me from the kind of life that I've already built? And the answer to that question is both. Like it's all happening kind of at once and at the same time. And as a result of those things being true, like you just have to, you have to be really, really flexible in terms of how you think about it. And you have to not get stuck behind kind of our prior assumptions, because the prior assumptions, again, it used to be you could rely on something that was true for maybe 20 years, maybe 50 years. You go back to prehistory, things were true for hundreds of years and you could just take them as a ground truth. And today that's not true at all. Today it's like, well, maybe you get 3 years, right? And in the world of AI, like I started working in the world of AI after focusing for a long time, after focusing for a long time on cryptocurrency and thinking to myself, oh, AI artwork is so much less complicated. This will be slower and I will be able to take more kind of breathing room. And in practice, it's the opposite. In practice, it's going about 4 times as fast as my experience in the very early days of cryptocurrency. So, disruption is the modern way of life right now. And figuring out kind of where we all fit in that life, figuring out what kind of life you want, and then positioning yourself to take advantage of that, to ride the wave rather than get smacked in the face by it, is kind of the most important skill that people can develop. So, the early days of NFTs, the early days of non-currency tokens, as I used to call them, really was that too, is again, positioning yourself for the disruption to be beneficial to you. And that's why I did a lot of the stuff that I did. It's not because I was like, oh my God, these are going to be, best ideas ever that are going to make millions of dollars. And it's not because I was like, oh, I've had this amazing idea. A lot of these ideas were out there. What I had was I had a community and a platform that allowed me sort of the privilege and expense, I will say, of being, one of the people to do this stuff first and learning all of the stuff that came with it, both for good and for bad. But ultimately, helping to kind of kick off a movement that I think right now, again, like we're in a bear market, and right before that we were in like a total bubble where valuations were absolutely insane. But the fundamental invention here is that blockchains provide a better way to track who owns what stuff on the internet. And that is transformative and disruptive in ways that are hard to quantify. And we're just now kind of starting to see them be quantified. And so that's really exciting to me. For a long time, I thought that maybe I was just fucking wrong about a lot of this stuff.
I have to say that. So I got into crypto towards the end of 2016 too. And so I came in right during the peak, right at the beginning of the ICO bubble. Yeah. And I have to say, last bear market, man, I didn't think anything was going to make out of it because it just didn't seem like there was really any utility outside of Bitcoin to me. So to the fact that now we have like a whole metaverse sector, we have an NFT sector, you have some other underlying things like social tokens, which are kind of things that you even dabbled in the very beginning. It's going to be interesting to see kind of what comes after, but maybe I'm just going to follow what you're doing and then maybe take a bet like 2 years after that. It tends to be the right direction. Yeah.
If I think back to the early days of what we were doing and sort of the 2014 era, et cetera, you're looking at YouTube now. Mm-hmm. We were never a YouTube presence in any sort of meaningful capacity. Like Mad Bitcoins. So talking about the early days when we were getting started with, all of this stuff. I had an audience of somewhere between 15, 25,000 people on the podcast side. And we grew that very quickly because there was this giant hole in the market at the time. And that hole in the market at the time was that there were a lot of engineers and a lot of very technical people who were talking to each other, but there was really no way there was a huge communication gap between them, right? So there were a couple of other shows that were out at the time, but over the course of the first 6 months that I was doing this stuff, they basically all went away because it was unsustainable for them. And you and I were talking a little bit before we got on, I had a situation where I had very, very limited costs and it really downsized my life to do other things. But I wound up being able to take advantage of that low burn rate to be able to just do this stuff without really caring about the money side of it. And most people didn't have that ability. So the creation of the network was really a selfish move on my part, because I got to December of 2013 and I was like, well, I want to listen to somebody other than me. Like I do love listening to myself, but I want to listen to somebody other than me. And I don't really have the ability to do that because there are no shows out there that really existed at that point. Everything had kind of closed down. So we did a contest and wound up kind of helping to spark the ecosystem that now I would argue is totally oversaturated, right? And there's just like, you have to pick a niche like you've done, where it's like, okay, well, it's not just cryptocurrency broadly or Bitcoin broadly. It is instead this kind of narrow focus for people who are really interested in that, because the market is now big enough that you can have these niches that are the size of kind of the audience that we had across the whole cryptocurrency space at the time. So it's a beautiful thing to see this place mature. And it's really the first technology that I've watched go from nobody cares about this, nobody understands this. I literally gave a talk to the Rotary Club in New York, in New York City in 2013, to all of these, 60 to 80-year-old men, talking to them about stone money and sort of the disintermediating factors, about like how like money is actually operated. And they were very respectful and asked a bunch of questions and stuff like that, but nobody understood this stuff. It was like, well, this is a novelty. Like this guy's talking to us about this thing, but it doesn't actually matter. And it matters so much, and it's going to matter so much more as time goes on. So I'm really hopeful for where we are right now with this. I talk sometimes about how I really don't have any faith in anything. And I really kind of one of the reasons why I'm so good with these disruptive technologies is because I don't get stuck in dogma. I just am constantly updating my mental model. And by nature of that, it means that I can be very nimble when it comes to this stuff. And so a lot of the things that we were talking about even 8 years ago in terms of why does Bitcoin really matter for money? Like all of that stuff is being proved out today. And I didn't even believe it was going to happen. I was like, the ship will right itself. Like all this stuff, there are so many opportunities to change the course of human events. And the reality of it is obviously at this point that the incentives do not align with the changing of the course of human events. And we're going to see this play out exactly the way, maybe not exactly the way, but pretty fucking close to the way that we were talking about way back when. And it's terrible and it's beautiful and it's reality.
It's the beautiful chaos. I pulled up on the screen for those that are listening, February 15th, 2014, episode 84 of Ethereum. So it's literally about 18 months before Ethereum, or 15 months before Ethereum ever went live, but the white paper had been out for a little bit of some time. So as I look through these episodes, and you mentioned there was one of the reasons because there was a massive communication gap between the community and the education out there. As you were going through your own podcasting journey, did your intentions stay the same? Were you doing it to fill that gap, or did it become more of an ambition for you to kind of uncover what else is out there and maybe go on and use it as leverage to create something substantial for your own brand?
So there's two answers to that question. One is that the most valuable asset that I believed from the first minute was my name and my reputation. And so I set out to be very, very careful with those things and let enormous amounts of money go by, but also manage to make it, basically a full 10 years as a person who doxed himself in crypto, without ever being involved in any sort of scandals, right? Like I was never, there were so many opportunities and there was so much money flowing around all of those. That 126 Make It Costly to Be Big. That's one of my favorite episodes. I don't know if it holds up, but I remember that art. I remember that art, and it was damn good. It just felt important to me, and it still does feel important to me. And that's been, again, like there are so many people who come up to me whenever I, go anywhere, less so these days because we haven't mattered in a while. But like so many people who are the CEOs of giant companies, who are just like, who really are making a difference in intense ways. Who got their start listening to Let's Talk Bitcoin because there was no alternative at the time. And so that again, like that's the big success that I think that I have from all of this is just having been there at the right place at the right moment to figure out and to help people talk through these ideas in ways that they had never considered before. As far as like, did my ambitions change over time? Arguably, yes, they did, but I got more insular rather than going broader. Because like that one right there, the 123 Mastercoin was the first token layer. And it Like they raised $500,000 in the summer of 2013 that turned into about $5 million when Bitcoin 10x'd a couple of months later. And then they burned through all of that money over the course of about a year. And the project did very little outside of, it's why Counterparty really came about. Counterparty was started in large part by people who had been involved with the early shit show that was Mastercoin. And we're like, well, we can do this and we'll do it better. And we're not going to waste all the money because we're not going to have any money. And they did it wrong too. They just did it wrong in the opposite way, right? And it's hard to learn these lessons. You look at stuff in the world of crypto and it's like, oh, hey, you know, those people did this in that way. I'm going to do this thing that I think is the opposite and equal kind of reaction to that. And it turns out that you're wrong also. Again, there's a middle ground, or maybe there's no middle ground. Maybe there's no good way to do it. But for as much as Mastercoin, burned through their money and then we're basically like, all right, that's pretty much it. Counterparty always suffered from an extreme lack of money and could never really find commercial traction as a result of those decisions. So it's interesting to see how two completely opposite approaches to the same exact problem still produced results that were kind of not what needed to happen. So anyways, I mention this because the very early days of cryptocurrency, before kind of tokens were a thing, there were all of these Bitcoin competitors. And so I was like, I was always of the opinion that, hey, maybe Bitcoin isn't it, right? Like Bitcoin's the first, but first often isn't the thing. And so let me dig into and talk to a lot of these projects. I was kind of very involved with the early Ethereum project. That was all organized in like January and late December of 2013 and early 2014 over Skype group chats, which was like the Slack or Discord alternative, to what kind of people are using today. And so again, just like, I had the opportunity to be a co-founder on that project, and I didn't want to be a co-founder on that project because I was like, I need to stay neutral. There needs to be somebody who's kind of above the fray on all of this stuff. And then as time went on and more projects came out, and I had vetted enough of them that I was like, all right, there really isn't anything new here under the sun. It just became about, well, someone wants to come on the show because they want to, shill their project. And then, hey, maybe they get, like 1% of the audience who then buys their shit. And then that makes it, a bunch of money for them. And I just hated that. I didn't take advertisers who, had any sort of really any type of coin thing available to them. It was all about kind of services and goods and stuff like that. And so we became, more insular. We did less interviews as time went on, just because it became so hard to vet people. And because also many of the ideas after the first 2 years, like they were already out there. We had been discussing them ad nauseum on multiple shows. And there wasn't a ton really more that you could do outside of somebody being like, aha, but this new project I'm launching is going to be a better version of Ethereum or a better version of Bitcoin. And it's like, all right, prove that first and then let's talk, So
what was it then about Counterparty that really sparked your interest? I pulled up right here the LTB coin, which is the official token of the LTB network. I think at this time you'd probably been hosting the show for a little over a year, maybe a year.
A little over a year. Yeah, we started in April of 2013, and we launched this in June of 2014.
And so, what was it about this that seemed different, or were you finally just set in your ways, and you're like, I'm gonna take a risk on something, and then just try to go from there?
It was possible. I mean, we talked with Mastercoin. Mastercoin hadn't collapsed at this point. Mastercoin would collapse, over the course of that summer or a little bit later. But it was possible. And the thing that Counterparty really had going for it was it's old hat now, but that web wallet. The counter wallet, .io, whatever, that was a revolution, right? Nobody had figured out how do you represent. I lost so much money, not so much money, but I lost money like 3 times working with Mastercoin, just because you'd like get a transaction wrong and then you're just boned. And there's nothing you could do about it. And it was so irritating. And the early web wallets on the Mastercoin side, which was the alternative here, there were no other alternatives outside of launching your own blockchain, basically having your own miners, and even kind of early projects in terms of, like NXT and stuff like that, which used very early versions of proof of stake. Like they were shit shows in their own way too. So everything was problematic. You didn't get to choose what's a great project. You got to choose what's the least worst project and how much do you care about, building this thing. And Counterparty was 100% the least worst. And it was actually quite good. And so we built out, I don't think it's on here, but Tokenly Pockets was what we called it eventually. The LTB Companion was what it was called first, and that was one of the very first Chrome browser extension wallets built by Joe Looney of Rare Pepe fame, of course, and a whole variety of other things. And he had built out a very first version of it that had, as far as I could tell, very few users. Called XCP Companion or something like that. And then I was like, hey, make me a version of that, right? And then we got the install base with like a lot of people using it. And it was great. It was amazing. We had like dynamic artwork that would pop up behind, the wallet whenever you would load it. And, there were all kinds of different features. And it was really beautiful. And LTB Coin in general was an amazing experiment that I'm really proud of. It was, again, the first tokenized rewards program that anybody had ever created, as far as I can tell. We were distributing it to tens of thousands of people per week. We were doing it on top of Bitcoin. So we were paying Bitcoin transaction fees for every one of those transactions. And that's what led me to start Tokenly. It was just like, well, in order to send out, LTB coin to, 10,000 people every week, that's either me sitting there, for like 3 days doing manual transactions, or it's us figuring out some way to integrate those things. And so as part of the LTB coin rewards program, this CMS you're looking at here is still over at letstalkbitcoin.com. That actually is the first tokenized content management system as well, where if you were to get inside the admin and stuff like that, you'd see that you can like associate different tokens with different roles within the platform. And we had a whole system right before I sold it to BTC Media that was about to be like token control access blogs, where they were like subdomains of Let's Talk Bitcoin, and you could control what people could see, and you could like make posts that are very similar to if you look over at Substack or something like that today, where it's like, here's the public part, and then here's the the deeper part that you have to be a subscriber for. We did that in 2014. With that type of thing. If you search for token controlled viewpoint, or TCV, that's the first write-up of what we now call, or what I call today, token control access, and some people call token gating. And that was a forum system that we built, token controlled viewpoint.
All right.
Yeah.
So then, as you were creating this, you mentioned that this was being distributed to tens of thousands of individuals. Was anyone actually making money off of this? Or it was just like a Marvel experiment, which then later set a precedent for what we see now with some of these token controlled projects?
I mean, people did make money off of it. It was traded on Poloniex, one of the first tokens, one of the first tokens, right? Not like coins, but tokens that didn't have its own blockchain that was. And it was traded there for a number of years back when that was sort of the preeminent exchange. And different people used it in different ways, right? And it was really interesting. I learned so much from this project. We had like a large contingent of like, I think it was Hungarian and then maybe Thai users, or no, it wasn't Thai. It was, oh gosh, I can't remember. It was an East Asian country anyways. And so like what we found was that the value of the thing was different based on your local value scale. So people in the United States or in the Western world generally tended to just like hold on to the token because it wasn't worth very much. It was worth less than a penny per. And, but they also had very little cost to getting it. Basically, the way that we set up this system is that we had 3 different pools of rewards, and we had this schedule that was set out well in advance. And basically, 2 of the pools were for content creators, and one of the pools was for the audience. And it was about 40% towards the audience and about 50% towards the content creators. And then I think it was 10% that went towards the network to cover costs, because there were a lot of costs associated with all of this stuff, and we did indeed not make any money off of it. So that's the way that it worked. And then if you were an audience member, you basically would, you'd be logged in, right? You'd have your like your wallet linked so that we would know where to kind of deliver tokens to. And then you would just go about the site kind of in the normal way. So if you made comments and those comments weren't deleted, then, that earned you a share of the rewards tokens. And if you made you made posts on the forum and they weren't deleted, then same thing. If you looked at a post for the first time, it was the same thing. Like there were points that would come to you from that because we wanted to incentivize these activities. We had a podcast rewards program that was a little bit harder to do that we called Magic Words. And Magic Words was basically during the ad break, we would say today's magic word is banana, right? And then you'd go to your dashboard, you'd type in the word banana over the course of, within 7 days of the show coming out. And then that would give us a validated, listener, and you would earn some of the rewards. And so like there were a couple of other buckets I'll talk about in a second, but the important part was that it was a competitive system. So what I really liked about that is that it allowed us to, so we had a pool where it's like, all right, this week there's going to be 100,000 tokens that we release through the rewards program. 40,000 of them are going to go to the audience. And then here are the different ways that you can sort of earn the maximum portion of that reward. And then what would happen is that those tokens would be distributed no matter what. So if there were very few people active on the site, then they were heavily incentivized. They got rewarded a lot because there weren't a lot of people competing. And on the other side, if it was really, really busy, then they didn't get rewarded as much because there were so many people there that the supply got shared between more people. So what I really liked about that, and we used this across the entire system, was that it incentivized sort of a leveling of kind of people's behavior, where if we're having a slow week, it incentivizes people and makes it more valuable for them to come and participate, and vice versa too. That was especially important, the vice versa part, on the content creator side, because we would have this kind of phenomenon where you'd get people who are really creating bursty content, right? Where it's like they'd come in and they'd post 3 episodes in a week and then they wouldn't do anything for like a couple of weeks. And I hated that because it made it so the front page was really inconsistent, and I wanted consistency. So by doing it the same way over there, we had 2 different systems on the content creator side. First, we had a reward that was just for making it through kind of our publishing process and actually making it to the front page. And that was an evenly split reward, where if you were, if your content got published in a particular week, and then it was put together with all the other pieces of content, and then each of them was rewarded an equal share of that pool. And then we would 2 weeks later look back at that same cohort of everything that had been produced over that 7 days, and we would compare the performance of each piece. And then we would do a weighted distribution based on how well your piece had performed compared to everything else, kind of in hindsight. And the important part here, as far as the causing people to stretch out content and to distribute it more regularly, is that if you posted 3 episodes one week and then no episodes for the next 2 weeks, whatever, then that means that during that week you posted your content, you were actually competing with yourself, and you were diluting your own performance and diluting the rewards that you would get, versus releasing one every week, which then gave you a smaller piece of more pools and made it so you were never competing against yourself. So again, there's a ton of ways just from game theory and aligning incentives that you can do really, really cool stuff like that. And the nice part about tokens is that in the early days, when I first conceived of this idea, I was like, okay, I have to have miners, and then I have to figure out how do I pay the miners. And then once I figure out how do I pay the miners, then I can give the rest of this token to the people who aren't miners, who I want to incentivize. And that was kind of the way we thought about early blockchains, was blockchains have miners. So therefore, if you want a token, you need a blockchain. And after Counterparty and, Mastercoin to a certain extent, that was obviously not true. And there are other challenges, right? You can't use LTB coin to pay for a transaction fee like you could if we had a, Dogecoin or something like that. But you have the entire supply to decide how you want to distribute it. And that's super duper powerful. So I've been really surprised we haven't seen more of this. I know Rug Radio does something like this today, and it's cool to see that, but I really expected this to be a thing that it's such an obvious win, right? Like it's such an obvious, just like awesome, like free thing to do to incentivize participation, that I have been surprised we haven't seen more of it.
I was going to bring up Rug Radio. Frok's a good friend of mine too that I debate ideas with, and to see them do that on Ethereum with maybe you could call it a more technologically superior chain that gives them more abilities to do things. And now you have the rise of, there was influencers who existed back then, but now with more entrants, you have people with larger platforms that go beyond Twitter, because back then, crypto does exist mostly on Twitter, but now you have TikTok and Instagram, who you could kind of swap those audiences back and forth, and YouTube, like YouTube influencers. You mentioned that you're the very beginning. So then as you were as you were dabbling, experimenting with these, you see all of these sub communities kind of pop up and flourish, and then all of these different shows. Maybe just thinking from just like a logistic standpoint, how long was the average of these shows? I know you said some were 3 episodes and then kind of faded off. Just in general, the average podcast today only lasts 7 episodes, which is unfortunate. That's actual stat. Yeah, I looked that up. So that's common. It's just like I forget what there's actual like technical name for it.
I mean, there's something to failing fast, I guess.
Was there any big social surprises that popped up during this? As I mean, is like as these individual communities are forming using your token, was there any sort of obstacles socially that you had to overcome in order to find more success with LTB coin and the network?
I mean, the biggest challenges around LTB coin was just the lack of tooling. Like that was the biggest challenge. Like we created an auction tool. And so the original vision of LTB coin was, hey, we're creating a currency that then can be used to exclusively buy sponsorships on the network. And so once you do that, once you say that thing and you start giving out the token, then you have to find all these ways to bridge the gap between actually doing that and, versus just saying it. And it's a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. One of the biggest challenges was that the types of people who we actually were giving LTB coin to, community members versus people who were, who wanted to advertise, there was a big gap between those people. And so we created a system, I think it's the first fully on-chain auction system that used non-currency tokens that we called the LTB Auctioneer. It never really went into production outside of like a couple of months of using it. And basically what we did there is we set up these fully on-chain auctions, which have a bunch of problems, by the way, because when you do things fully on-chain, everybody can see what everybody else's bid is. And so there were some challenges around that. And then we would auction off different types of tokens. And the tokens were like sponsor tokens, and other shows did that as well. And those tokens could then be redeemed through a different system that we built, which we called at the time Tend, like tending store, and then later turned into tokenmarkets.com. And we basically set it up so that people could check out with these tokens and then, buy things. I also have tokens out there that are like, I think Half Hour Atom was one, and that was like a half-hour consulting token. I think I had Hour Atom too, or something like that. No, I had consult tokens. It was consult tokens were the hour-long one, and Half Hour Atom was the half-hour one. So we had stuff like that. We worked with projects. We'd have listeners who would contact us, and like somebody like who ran a big like coffee shop in San Francisco would be like, hey, I want to do something. What can we do? And we'd be like, oh, cool. Let's create a token for you that represents a pound of coffee, and then like you'd auction that on the thing. So it was really cool. But it was still really hard. What I learned from those early experiences was that just because a thing is possible and just because me and 10,000 people, are willing to mess with this thing doesn't mean necessarily that it's commercially viable. And I came to really appreciate just how difficult it is for friction to kind of get past those inconveniences and really connect the dots with something that really matters. The LTB coin Q&A, goodness. Yeah, there's me in the little house there, Project Hangout right there. That was my 250 foot, square foot little house that I was in for the first 6 years.
As we were discussing before. So then moving a little bit later into 2014, you also became the first person to tokenize a coin on Dogeparty, and you were a co-founder of it. And from what I believe the story goes is that somebody had mentioned it on the podcast or had brought it up to you. You brought them on the podcast, and then using Tokenly or your experience, you helped them kind of build this together. No,
this is
completely wrong. All right.
Totally wrong.
All right.
So let's correct the record here. First off the bat, I did not create the first token on Dogeparty. Somebody else created the first token on Dogeparty, dedicated it to me, and then transferred the rights to me. So that's the way that this wound up working. And I didn't even know that this had happened until like 6 years later when somebody was like, you created the first token on Dogeparty. I was like, I don't think I did. I was like, I was late actually. Like I went and I created a bunch of stuff, but at that point, like I had so many assets on Counterparty. I registered like 600 or 700 assets in the early days. A lot of which never made it through one of the very early transitions. They're still sitting in like, you go to that old wallet thing, right? Like I have like probably 200 assets that are still sitting there. So anyways, yeah. So LTBC I did not create. Somebody got that first, and then they transferred it to me, and I have no idea who it is. The people who I thought it might be, I've asked, and they're like, "Yeah, no, I didn't do that." So if you are out there, you can email me, Adam at adamblevine.com. I would like to know. Okay, so now Dogeparty. Dogeparty arose out of a project that I was, my official job title was Chief Visionary Officer, which was called Humant. Humant.is was the website. Everything is gone now. One of the things that we built very early on, or that the guys built before I joined, was this thing called Etherpad. And it was like a non-pad, but like there were some tokenized elements to it and collaborative elements. So it was a writing solution where the stuff would then disappear later, right? We did everything kind of in that. So I don't have a ton of records from this period of time, but Dogeparty started because the guys at Humant wanted to create tokens for Twitter. They wanted to have like Twitter identities and like tweets be able to be represented with tokens and something that you could kind of send from one to the other. And I was like, this is a stupid idea. Like I did not like the idea at all. I was like, there's no value in these things, right? Like you're doing like it didn't make any sense to me, but I was like, all right, so we can, and then eventually we were like, hey, let's go forward with this because they really wanted to do it. So I was like, my role in a lot of the early projects that I was part of was to be like, this is dumb. Here's a slightly less dumb way to do the thing that you want to do. And so Dogeparty came out of that need, and we're like, hey, let's just take Counterparty and we'll just map it over to Dogecoin, and it'll be a much cheaper version because this is too expensive to do on. There we go. Great. Yeah. So Wendell, I didn't realize this site was still live. Yeah, I mean, these were a lot of the early people. I don't know Sayori, but Lars was the original developer. Michael used to actually at the time was working as a consultant for Mt. Gox. Matt was the designer as far as like the visual designer, so the logo for Dogeparty and kind of all of that stuff. And then Wendell was sort of the mad genius who had started Hive Wallet, and so I had known him through that. And then I got to know these guys over the course of my 28th birthday in December of 2013, when I invited them basically up to my birthday, which I was getting away from the little house for like the first time in like a year and a half, and was going up to like this Russian spa in Southern Washington. And so I brought them up to talk about them doing LTB coin for me, because I'm like, hey, I need somebody to build this. And they're like, yeah, it seems like we could. And so like 6 of them show up. There are a bunch of people who aren't on this page here also were there. And this story is somewhat accurately captured in Cami Russo's book, The Infinite Machine, I think is what it is. Yeah. So there's a chapter in there that's about my birthday party, hilariously, because a bunch of these people then went on to become co-founders of Ethereum before subsequently disappearing. So that was kind of how it came out. Was I hooked up with these guys, and I walked away from that meeting and I was like, hey, I have more ideas than you guys do about the stuff that I want to do. So I'm just going to put together my own team. I hired Nick Rathman, who was my go-to CTO for about 8 years until somewhat recently. And we built the stuff on our side, but I worked with them in a consulting capacity as a chief visionary officer. And so that's where Dogeparty came from, is we wanted to launch this thing that was going to be counterparty functionality, but a lot cheaper. And so therefore we could use it for things where economically it just didn't make any sense to do it on Bitcoin. The challenge was, and the reason why it eventually failed, for a long time, it's come back now, was that we only had one developer on the team, and that developer was Matt. And so Matt, so we launched the thing, we kind of gin up some interest around it. I bought my first, a bunch of Dogecoin and burned almost all of it, which in hindsight was a pretty poor choice. And so then like a week later, he's like, hey, I'm like collapsing and was just like completely out of energy. And it turned out to be a lot harder to do the conversion than we thought it was going to be. And the whole project kind of fell apart. And it was sort of the end of Humant at that time. Dogeparty actually sort of destroyed the organization that created it. And then eventually it kind of just died. And it was very sad for a while. And I forgot about it for a long time because I did so many things. But yeah, now it's back, and I'm quite excited to see it back. I hope that people do good things with it, And I continue to think that the counterparty approach of like having defined primitives where it's like, this is a token can do this, this, and this, right? And have that built in. Like I use Ethereum today for stuff, and I use, Polygon and, like different sorts of chains like that. And it just continues to just chap my hide that you have to continuously every single time tell the protocol, this is a token. How does it work? And it just makes it so hard compared to just doing something with the basic counterparty approach where it's like, click a button, name the token, decide some basic stuff, and then, hey, there it is. Like, it's super straightforward. So that's the story of Dogeparty in a very rambly way.
Oh, no, that's the perfect way you could describe it. It's interesting how I've had recently a few guests on who are also early counterparty token creators or experimenters. I had JP Jansen on, and he also mentioned that he had claimed about 3,000 tokens between 2014 and 2015. And it's because he said he actually saw it more as like a domain approach than an actual token approach.
Most people did. Yeah.
And it seems that individuals tend to have a different definition of it, which now it's conformed more towards like art and things, because that's what it took some years to kind of build that Pepe narrative or experimentation with Spells of Genesis. But early, man, it was all over the place. And I think this is why it's so cool that you see the various attempts at different token asset classifications, which are now almost their own defined thing, which then we go back to you going and creating one of the first ever music NFTs, which is also kind of still undefined, but defined, right? And, but then you see like a podcast NFT or a community token NFT, and all of these that you did were all wrapped into one. And then over time, it kind of gets unbundled as people realize, hey, the LTP network that took basically like 10 different approaches into one, these can all individually be its own asset market class. But here, there's always a common debate of like, what's the first music NFT? What is actually a music NFT? What does it actually mean just because it's related to it? But this was brought back, I think, towards the end of last year. Just tell us a little bit of how you came to this, of creating these token-gated music NFTs, and also that you're somewhat of an rapper and an artist as well.
I'm not a rapper. God, I hope I'm not a rapper. But yeah, I mean, like I said, like I'm the hardest working lazy person that you'll meet. That leads me down lots of paths. And I love music. And I hated music for a long time, actually. I stopped listening to music because I just couldn't stand the vast majority of the stuff that was out there. It's only somewhat recently I started listening to music. So I took the approach of, I was working with Tatiana Moroz and let me back up on this story a little bit. Okay. So I started Tokenly, and Tokenly was doing a bunch of different things, and we found that we had built out an e-commerce solution, a identity solution called Token Pass. What we're looking at here, this is a SwapBot, which was an on-chain vending machine system that we built that even today, like some of the features we had in there, like bulk discounts, you can see there offers bulk discounts. Like that's stuff that you still don't really see in any of this stuff that's out there. And these were all built such that anyways, without going too far into it. So I built a bunch of stuff. And I spent a lot of time talking with companies like Spells of Genesis, and we serviced sort of their early card uses and helped a bunch of other projects too, but kept running into the problem that every single company that we would work with actually viewed themselves not as a game in Spells of Genesis's case, but as an infrastructure that would then be the thing that really would make them the money to do the thing that they wanted to do. And that was hard because what I had built was an infrastructure company. And so we get to early 2015, and I'd been working with Tatiana for a couple of years at that point. We met in late 2013, and she's like, "Hey, I know these people at this project called Fermat, and they want to build a music application." And that uses tokens. And I was like, oh, that's a really cool idea. One of the first things we had talked about was this concept of label coins, where you could have like a label that issues a token, and it could be a speculative token, but it wouldn't have to be a financialized speculative token, right? Because you buy the token and it gives you access to all the music that's available. And then as the label adds more and more music to it, the token naturally becomes more valuable because it gives you access to more content. And so we thought that this was a way to kind of move around these things might be securities argument and go straight towards, no, this is just a product that gets more valuable over time because there's just more utility that's associated with it, right? And so we started working on that, and my company was responsible for creating sort of the API and the back end, kind of how is all this stuff going to work. And then Fermat was this sort of collective, let's call it that, that was building kind of the front end and the application for it, right? And so again, I wanted to be the electric company of tokens, and so we were building that part. So fast forward about 6 months, we're done with our part of the product. Fermat has essentially collapsed. And so we're like, well, fuck, like we spent all this time building this thing. I guess we're now in the business of building a front end for this stuff too. And so through 2015, we built that. And then in early 2016, we finished sort of the first meaningful versions of it. I think it was that. My timing might be off. Years slipped together at this point. But anyways, we finished building kind of the front end version of Token FM. At the time, it was called Tokenly Radio. And so, as I do with everything else, I was like, hey, I guess I should make some music and I should, and I should create some tokens just to make sure that this thing actually works. Because there's only so many times you can listen to, Devin, one of my other co-founders, dog barking, like as a proof of concept. So I had bought an Ableton Live. And again, like I slept all the way through all my music theory classes when I was going to audio engineering school, and just started kind of making music that just kind of made me happy. And then I took that music, and the first thing that I released was, as far as like music is concerned, was my first EP called A Little Color. And again, very clangy music, like I still like it because I made it for me, but I don't really know how much anybody else likes it. And so I created these tokens, I believe in January of 2016, right before I then helped Tatiana create her own tokens. And so I considered myself, I was the first person who created tokenized, music. And I released it actually before the beta of the app was up. And I released it through the token control access feature on my Let's Talk Bitcoin blog, because I had created a blog that was, I think, letstalkbitcoin.com/blog/mind2matter. And that had all these token control access features built into it. And so I was like, hey, here's this thing I did. If here's the music I'm releasing right now. If you want to buy these tokens, you can buy these tokens. Most people did not buy the tokens. I sold very, very few of them and wound up with the vast majority. And the idea is I created 4 different tokens as, again, a prototype of kind of what I thought was going to become the norm. Here you go. These are, I guess, there it is. There's the blog link down there. So I was like, okay, well, first off, I'm going to create my own label coin, right? So my MTM collector was designed to be that. And MTM collector was like, hey, this is a token for collectors. Anybody who wants access to all of my music can buy the token now, and I'll continue to raise the price as I release more and more music, such that people who bought it at the lower price get a good deal. But I can continue to kind of grow my audience on this side. The other 2 tokens that I created that were kind of the simple ones were MTM Song and MTM Album, and those basically worked within the 10 system. So again, what became tokenmarkets.com, that would then allow people to go in and to turn them in for a download of a particular song or a particular album. And it wasn't really intended to gain value. Most of these tokens were intended not to be speculative, because I was very concerned that would become a problem kind of later on. And then the one that I think is the most popular today is the MTM producer token. And that was a combination of the collector concept along with this kind of early access concept. And the idea there really was that within the applications we were creating, we had the ability to control which tokens would give people access to stuff. So what I would do is, with the very early versions of Token FM, I would post early versions of the songs. And then I would make it so that people who have my MTM producer token could get access to that. And then they could send me emails, and we had a chat system set up. We did an integration with Rocket Chat super early. And we could kind of just talk about it. That never really got off the ground beyond, maybe 5 or 10 people. But that was kind of the idea behind it was the combination of the collector token, plus it was this idea of these people are actually my producers and they can be sort of the people who are vested in my success, who I want to get feedback from, because they're probably going to tell me honest feedback and I can actually kind of improve things from there. So I had other tokens, Little Color, again, like I tokenized all of the various albums that I created, which I think was just 2 or 3. I had one that was kind of in production, but that project got thoroughly kiboshed, and then I went into a hellish period of my life. In October of 2017, I think it was 2017, when we were finally ready to launch Token FM, and it was a product that looked amazing and it was beautiful and it worked really well. And had all these features built into it against all these types of things. And we were set to do an ICO. And basically our lawyers who had flown up from Los Angeles and were at my house, got there, put down their briefcases, and were like, hey, we just read the DAO report. And we're like, we think this is going to be illegal. And so you need to do something different or we're going to quit. And so I'm very, technology forward, but very risk averse when it comes to legal overhang. I really like my life and I really hate being under the control of anybody else. And so I was like, all right, let's scrap that idea. And instead, let's try to raise money using a security token. If these things are all going to be securities, then let's just go ahead and go into that. And so then, I spent probably 6 or 7 months of my life and about $80,000 in terms of personal expense, trying to do that and going through the full diligence for Regulation D security token, and got to the end of that process and was like, all right, well, we can do this now, but nobody wants to buy these things. They're terrible compared to tokens, and they're terrible even compared to equity. So we've got this product. Let's just go and sell equity to some companies that are like professional investors, and like make this thing go. And that was unfortunately corresponding right with sort of the peak of the ICO boom, when nobody wanted equity and everybody just wanted tokens. And so that was the hellish period of my life, where I would do calls every day with different funds that were out there and different, high profile investors. And we got really far with some of them, and it always wound up coming back to but what's our exit, right? How do we get liquidity out of this? And I'm like, well, if I was going to do a token before, I would have done it a year ago. So let's, I don't know. I guess you just have to accept the fact that you're going to have equity and we're all going to make money together. Otherwise, like, what the hell are we doing here? So that beat a lot of the entrepreneurial spirit out of me for a couple of years. And I wound up taking a job at CoinDesk. First, because my relationship kind of fell apart with, also due to the ICO boom, kind of fell apart with BTC Media, who had purchased the network from me. And I just watched with great pain as they did none of the things that they said that they were going to do. Not none of the things, but they didn't do any of the things as far as really kind of taking care of the community and growing the thing. And instead, they just kind of milked the platform, in my opinion. And I just watched those subscribers that I had built over the years just tick down and down and down and down. And, and so I was very unhappy with that. So I went to CoinDesk, and I knew Pete Rizzo over there very, very basically. And I was like, hey, syndicate the show, syndicate, let's talk Bitcoin. I have Andreas Antonopoulos. Like, we're, not as big as we used to be, but at the same time, like, this is a quality show. You guys need something like this. And over the course of about 6 months, that conversation kind of progressed. And then I went back to them over the summer and was like, hey, let's do this now. And he's like, hey, what do you think about actually building out kind of the network for us? And I was like, yeah, I can do that. And that was great. And I really, really liked working at CoinDesk. It came in at a period of time when it was a transition, because a couple of days before I was supposed to sign paperwork with them, Pete Rizzo got fired. And so there was this period of time that was about maybe 5 or 6 months, where the organization was basically headless. And so I just got to go in there. My rabbi, so to speak, was John Biggs, who former TechCrunch editor, who I had met kind of early in both of our lives in the world of crypto. And he was great. I love working with him. And so he, again, kind of took me under my wing. It was the first time that I'd ever worked in a company that I either didn't run or that had more than 5 people in it. And so I went in terrified of a whole bunch of different things. And then I totally found my sea legs and, helped start some things that became very, very successful. I still do this podcast we're looking at today. I do it every morning as a contractor for them these days. And yeah, again, it's a really great organization that I've had a lot of fun working with, and may in fact work with them again in the future. But yeah.
Yeah, you've just going through your entire story. It's absolutely fascinating to see the progression of stumbling onto something unique and then being like, oh shit, this idea is so big. I also need the infrastructure, so I have to build that as well. And then build the network and relations along the point to now you're always ahead of the trend. And now where we are today, looking back through about 10-year career in the history, we've gotten to the point now where historical NFTs have become something, right? This idea of vintage assets, hilariously, right? So ironically or unironically, whether historical NFTs got a bad name, the idea of just like digital antiquities relative to the age of an industry is something that makes sense to just humanity in general. We've always been some sort of collectors, whether it was berries or gold or just survival or collecting, significant others, depending on the era that you lived with in society. So the community, it's pretty. Oh man, I don't know how to describe it. It's a loving community of these tokens that gets lost in the idea of semantics because of the ambiguity of back then. You even noted that the token, there was no real direction, there was no definition to it, but it has become a real big market, and a lot of the biggest or largest NFT sales actually are owned by a lot of these historical NFT collections, going from Spells of Genesis to Rare Pepes to different ones on ETH like Mooncats and CryptoPunks and so on and so forth. As you've gone through and you are a creator of some of these assets, what is your view on the industry as honestly as you view it? I guess you could say from when it was first presented to you, I'm assuming Adam or somebody kind of came to you, to kind of now sitting in it and being a participant. Just how do you view the whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, so to be clear, the people who pulled me into what we'll call the NFT archaeology space, there were actually two different attempts to do this. The first attempt involved people like White Rabbit. I don't remember. There were two other people at the time who were also trying to get me to do stuff, and I don't remember who they were. And I was like, hey, yeah, like dig through my old papers, and like you can find lots of stuff that I did, and like tell me if you think that there's something that's useful for us to do. And I was so busy with just all of my other stuff that project didn't really go anywhere. And then Coin King and TK, I think it's TK, yeah, came to me more recently, like end of last year or something like that, and we're like, hey, we think that that there's a thing here. And I was like, I mean, like, if you guys want to do a thing, then let's do a thing. Like, tell me how I can support, I have these assets. And so we looked at the different assets that we had, or that I had. And they were like, the Mind to Matter stuff seems like this is kind of the place to start with this. And then they have lots of other ideas. But again, like I feel like if anything, like I've been shocked and very humbled, I think, by TG, not TK. Thank you. And very humbled by kind of the reception and the interest in the projects, which again, were never intended as commercial projects. They were intended as just, hey, like somebody has to be first. I'm not going to ask anybody else to be first, so I might as well just do it and then kind of prove it out. And that's kind of how I've done most of the stuff that I've done. Is again, the intent is not to make money. If anything, I've taken so many steps to avoid making money because I felt like it complicated a lot of stuff. And which is then turned into money kind of in the latter era, much to my chagrin. So no, I'm really honored by it. If I take a step back from all of that, then I think that there's just a huge, you said that we're all collectors. I would say that slightly differently, which is that we're all speculators, right? Like we live in a world right now that's driven by mania, and that mania is not because of us. It's kind of despite us. It's despite kind of the way that the rest of the world is going right now. And this has almost nothing to do with kind of our behavior. Our behavior is driven by the fact that mania is just the only sane way to behave in these types of environments. And I've taken great pains to not get caught up in mania because, again, like I have some friends who, have made tens of millions of dollars in like ICO booms and like garbage projects and stuff like that. And the challenge, the sacrifice you make is that you have to basically break your brain and you have to like stop thinking about things in a way that's logical and start thinking about things in a way that's more native to mania. And so it makes you a good speculator, but I think that it hurts your ability to process information in ways that are valuable outside of speculation. So I see a lot of that in the NFT space in general, of course, but I see a lot of it in the historical space. There are legitimately some projects that are out there, and I'm not going to name any specific names because I don't really know, much less care. This is not a new thing, right? Like even back in the Spells of Genesis days, one of the big disconnects that I saw was that over here are the people who like actually want to play the game and are buying assets to play the game. And this is a tiny, tiny subset. And then over here is the much bigger people who are like, oh my God, games on the blockchain, this is going to be huge. I better get some, right? And the challenge of that is that when this audience is small and this audience is big, this audience gets basically crowded out, and it makes it so that the project itself can't really succeed because who's going to pay again, like $2,500, 7 years ago for a Satoshi card, even if it's a really great card, and that's what we saw these things trading for. And so that led me to then create products like tokenpass.com or tokenly.tokenpass. No, what the hell is it? tokenpass.tokenly.com. Still up today. Where you can do off-chain lending, where you can actually like prove to the service that you own a particular Bitcoin address, and then it'll show you your tokens, and then you can actually lend it to somebody else off-chain. And the reason why we did that is because we saw these gamers who were trying to actually use one of these cards for like a tournament or something like that, and you had to, if you wanted to like rent something from somebody, you had to actually like provide them with collateral, and the collateral had to be worth a lot more than the thing that they were actually giving you. And that was just like such an obvious like total stopping point for that. And as Bitcoin got more expensive too, like a lot of challenges arose around that. It just made it so it was really hard to do a lot of stuff. So I'm happy that the ecosystem has progressed a lot. There's still so many things left to do, but like that tension between real users on this side and speculators on this side, we're still mostly in speculator land, and that, I guess, is to be expected, but I think that it needs to change before any of this stuff can really take off in any sort of meaningful way.
Yeah, I think now too, just talking about the idea of gaming NFTs, I see a lot of bull thesis for 2023 and 2024 forming around these gaming NFTs, whether that's, some sort of in-game tokenized asset marketplace system, kind of like what you see to RuneScape, or whether some game is actually just fun, right? And mimics something maybe like GTA or these games that we see today. It's still seems very far off, but I think the idea that you're just talking about above the speculators vastly outcrowding the actual gamers and the people want to play is something that's pretty overlooked. I hadn't thought about it at that time. And so maybe we'll see then, unfortunately or fortunately for Spells of Genesis, those early second or third series that are now considered the historical assets are pretty much out of touch for most of those gamers, but it adds more legitimacy to the game, I think, overall. Just interesting to see how it goes.
I mean, Spells of Genesis, hilariously, like I don't know what they officially describe the game as, but I always thought of it as basically Peggle with heroes, right? Like that, because you're like shooting a ball and then you're trying to knock stuff out and like score points. I mean, like, in what world should those be worth any amount of money, right? Like, again, like, so there's just that. There's this beautiful idea of the thing, right? And then there's the actual reality of the thing. And the speculators tend to get caught up in the beautiful idea because that's what speculators do. We look into the future and we say, and I am definitely a speculator in many ways, although I'm not so much anymore for a variety of reasons, mostly because I found it to be way too stressful. So where I see the gaming stuff going is games need to be created that have this as implicit to them, and they have to be fun, as you said, because a lot of the game stuff that's happened just hasn't been fun enough. And like it's hard to create a game, and it's hard to create a game that's really going to break through the noise. And it's such a competitive arena, and things get obsolete so fast. So again, like people are trying to reverse engineer this value creation process, which is like, hey, Magic the Gathering has, you know, valuable cards. Pokemon has valuable cards. Therefore, let's start by creating valuable cards, and then we'll have the game kind of follow that. And it's exactly the opposite of how it worked in real life, which is that these games were fun and became huge by nature of not being valuable, but by nature of not being valuable, right? It was the opposite. And so then you had, over time, as they became culturally important, then they became valuable. So Spells of Genesis, I think, the best thing that they did was they were first. And I think that there is value in that, because as you go further down the chain, you just see that, well, it's hard to pick what is the meaningful one once you get, you know, 15 projects in, right? But the first one, obviously valuable. And so you have this kind of like this 80-20 rule type thing, where it's like 80% is going to go towards the obvious choice, and the obvious choice, whether you're talking about Bitcoin for, you know, money, Ethereum for smart contracts, and then you get kind of like the divergence. And there, everybody is just kind of spreading out because there are different reasons why people like particular things. So I think being first on something is really valuable from that perspective, just because you're obvious. And that then makes it so you get kind of that majority, or at least, you know, like call it half of the market that goes into that. But it's tough, and gaming has a tough road ahead of it, which has really nothing to do with NFTs. And if anything, NFTs are going to get in the way of it.
Quite interesting. And to end it here, you're speaking just to the historical thesis, with historical relevance first and then cultural significance second, which seems to be a common value metric rating system for most of the collectors in the space.
I really haven't looked at any of the frameworks. I'm not commenting on anybody's projects.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
You were speaking to it to gaming, which is actually something that most of the historical collectors also use as a system as well.
I mean, you know, like, I think it's a little different for this stuff, just because all of these things started, like, tokens mean something is necessarily financialized, right? And that's just different than any type of innovations we've had in the past. So, you know, I think, again, the early stuff is likely to wind up being valuable just because everything is valued. And so, again, the obvious choice is going to be the winner. But yeah, as far as like, where does it go from here? You know, I'm waiting for kind of the AA+ games that I think will be coming out over the course of this year. I think those are ones that have the chance to get the balance right and really start to push this stuff into the mainstream, which we haven't talked about at all, but that has actually been the thing that I've been trying to do for like 8 or 9 years at this point. Literally since the very beginning, it was all about early majority for me. And the big mistake that I made was I thought early majority was a year away or 2 years away. And in practice, it was like 6 years away. So, you know, getting there that early isn't a lot different from being wrong. But again, it's the friends you make along the way.
Yeah, right. And, it's not about timing the market; it's time in the market. Maybe
it's about timing the market too. That's why I'm still doing the entrepreneurial stuff, is because I've created a lot of product. I have yet to create a company that is really impactful and meaningful and empowering to people. And so I continue to try to do that, trying to do it right now in AI with Pixelmind. And we will see how it goes.
Yeah.
But at least I'm not 6 years early this time. I'm happy about that.
Yeah, AIs are definitely starting to take off. Even one of the early AI projects called From Deep Black has been getting a lot of attention recently, as people have beginning to put more focus, maybe because that's a DALL-E 2 or these new things. And then the debate of is AI art actually art? But that's something we'll have to save for another day. So Adam, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your time with us. A true pioneer in the space. Also somebody who's not afraid to speak their mind, no matter which side of the spectrum you sit on. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jake.
Thank you guys for listening, watching. We'll catch you next time.